Hey, welcome to Broken World Entertainment and a review for Rings of Power Episode 2. This one will be probably a bit more put together as I've taken notes this time, and it's not 3 o'clock in the morning. So, we get an intro this time, and it's very, very much in the Game of Thrones style. Now, the way in Game of Thrones, the start is you're going across the map and everything's building up out of it and all that good stuff. They take that type of thing on board, but it's not buildings and stuff being built up, but it's all these designs being morphed around. The intro is quite long, actually. A bit longer, like it's probably about a minute and a half, maybe. Bit long, but whatever. So we pick up where we left off in the first episode. I was going to say last week. It wasn't last week. With Galadriel in the middle of the goddamn ocean, looking at the sky, and then she just starts swimming. She's in the middle of the ocean, like. she just starts swimming. You're like, okay. That immediately jumps to the hobbits, or Harfoots, and the wizard. So it immediately jumps to them, or to, what's her name? Elnor, I believe it is. Brandyfoot or something, I think is what she's called. Yeah, Elnor. With the wizard, who doesn't speak. He kind of whispers every now and again. She's climbing down into the crater, and there's fire all around this thing, right? And she puts her hand in it, and it's like, oh, it's actually cold. Which reminds me of a line that was said in the first episode, which was so stupid, I forgot to mention it. Again, I was half asleep when I'd done that review. Where Galadriel and her army, when they're going into the cave where the snow troll is, one of the guys puts his hand into the flame of his torch. And he's like, hey man, it's that cold. I've lost feeling in my hands. And she says, the evil is that strong down here, your flame has no heat. Or something to that effect. It was just so stupid. And then, of course, this episode gets, again, it fire everywhere, and them putting their hands in it. It's like, hey, it's cold. So Elnor is down next to the wizard, who, I'm going to say it right now, I'm pretty sure we're all in agreement, it's probably Gandalf. Where her friend, I thought it was her sister, it's just a friend, shows up and like, don't. She pokes him in the face. He doesn't move. She looks back and he grabs her hand, and all of a sudden all the fire starts swirling around them and builds up, and then it just vanishes with all this kind of mayhem going on. And when he lets go of her, the fires reignite in the crater. I'll be honest, the effects they used with the fire and stuff in that scene were actually pretty decent. As I said with the first episode, there were some decent visuals. But that was actually a decent visual. By the way, in that scene, our little Harfoot isn't that a little next to the wizard. Yeah, he's kind of in the fetal position, but even when he grabs her arm and stuff, he's like, they're almost natural size to each other. Keep that in mind. We then immediately go to Don Lemon, Elf, and Bronwyn, I believe is how you pronounce her name, in a village that they were going to. I believe it's where the cow was grazing that had something wrong with it, all the black shit coming out of it. They're looking around, and I want you to understand this part. They're looking, and he says there's no bodies and there's no wounded, and then it immediately cuts to a dead, wounded sheep. Now, obviously, they're meant to be talking about people, but when you say there's no bodies, you would assume like there's nothing, no animals, nothing. But the fact that that line comes out, there's no bodies and there's no wounded, to immediately the next frame of film is to show a fucking dead sheep. You're just like, there's one. So they enter a home, or what's left of a home, that Bronwyn knew the person that lived there, and there's a big hole in the ground. So Don Lemon tells her to go back and warn the village. He throws the flame torch down into the hole. Keep this in mind, by the way. He's got a flame torch. Keep that in mind. That's all he has. He throws that down, tells her to go. She says, what are you going to do? And he's like, I have to go and see what's down here. And she's like, but you don't know what's down there. And his response is, that's exactly why I have to go. Alright, you fucking genius. So she buggers off and he jumps down. Then we go immediately from that. The way they just hop is craziness. We go to Elrond, and he's having a conversation with Celebrimbor, or Celebrimbor, however the hell you pronounce his name. Nanny McPhee. And Keller is, I'm just going to call him Keller, he's discussing that they need to build something new and unique, and something more than frivol jewelry, he says, basically. And they say, okay, and what's the plan for that? How do we do that? And he shows them blueprints that the idea is he wants to build a tower with a brand new forge in it. Obviously, they're leading to forging the rings. And the only way, are the only people that Elrond knows that could do such a task in such a short time. He needs it done by, I believe they said they're in September. And they need it done by the end of October. He definitely said they need to be done in October, but I can't remember whether they're actually in October or September. But either way. So the only people Elrond knows that could do it in that short of time is the Dwarfs. So we immediately go to the Dwarfs. Elrond and Cat arriving up to the doors. Now, I'm going to assume the doors are supposed to be the doors from the Fellowship of the Ring that Gandalf and Frodo and Pippin and all them go into. But when Celebrimbor is asking Elrond, like, are you sure? Like, this will work? Like, that they'll actually let us in? And I shit you not. I shit you not. Elrond quotes the line from Fellowship of the Rings, from the dwarf and that, with the whole, oh, we'll be met with the horns blown and the feasts and all this crap. They get denied entry, they're told no. And Elrond is shocked because his friend is like one of the higher ups in this place, so he invokes some sort of tournament. So he gets brought in to there. That scene is so funny though, that they. But oh, so we follow Elrond in. I love this. We follow him. You get that scene from the trailer again of him on kind of the bridge looking down over the thing. This scene is strange because it doesn't look too bad until the camera gets to a certain angle, and whatever way they are in the frame walking, everything else, they look out of place. It was such a weird effect the way it went. But for our famous Disa, who by the way is not in the first episode, you know, the face of necessary redress of balance, for her championing that she will be the first female dwarf ever seen on film. Yeah, she's not even that in her own show, because you start seeing female dwarfs while Elrond is being led through the city. You're just like, oh, there's a few females and there's a bunch more of them over there, look. So she's not even, she doesn't even have the claim of being the first ever female dwarf in her own goddamn show. And they don't have beards. I want to point that out, that they do not have beards. So the trial is you think it's like some sort of trial of combat or something. If Elrond loses, he's to be basically banished from all of Dwarf land, never to return. But if he wins, he gets an audience with the king. It's not a tournament to the death or a fight or anything. It's a feat of strength. They're basically gonna smash rocks with hammers. Yeah. So then we jump right back to the hobbits. What's her bloody name again? Elnor. We jump to her and the wizard, who all of a sudden is doubled in size. Hence why I said keep in mind that they seem to be roughly the natural sizes to each other, because he's now double the size, because Elnor and her friend, whose name I don't know, don't care, Poppy. Her friend's name is Poppy. They want to help the wizard. Well, Elnor wants to help the wizard, so they stick him in a wheelbarrow and are taking him to hide him. But he's doubled in size from when you see them beside him at the start, which I just thought was funny because it was so stupid. And then we go straight back to Galadriel swimming in the ocean. And all of a sudden she comes across a raft. It's a big raft. Load of people on it. This is where we meet what's he called? Hellbrand, aka Sauron. Spoiler alert. So he wants to bring her on the raft, Or no, sorry, one of the women on the raft wants to bring her onto the raft. One of the other guys is like, no, we don't know who she is and where she's from and blah blah blah. They bring her onto it and they ask her, did you see it? And she's like, see what? The worm. Big sea monster thing that apparently destroyed their ship. They ask, obviously, who she is, where she's from. She doesn't tell them she's an elf or anything. She just says she got lost from her ship. All of a sudden, they see a sail coming through and they start calling for it. And they're like, wait, hang on, we don't know who this is. This could be this group who's skinny alive and stuff. Until Galadriel says that's not one of their ships, and the guy who didn't want to bring her on board is like, that's our ship. And it's the sail of their ship is stuck to this big beastie, which they're calling the sea worm. By the way, they then turn around. Now, keep in mind, they're calling it a worm. And they turned around and said, don't move and don't make a sound. I instantly jumped to, oh my god, it's tremors in the ocean. But it comes along, and the woman who helped Galadriel out and was like, hey, we gotta help her, blah blah blah, immediately pushes her back into the ocean, thinking, oh, she brought that thing to us. It's like, oh, alright. Hellbrand starts untying a part of the raft. And while Galadriel is out back in the ocean, she looks up and you see the worm destroy the raft. Every last bit of it. You see every last bit of it. Because he did not untie the part he's standing on quick enough to the time you see this thing come out and just obliterates the raft. So she's now left in the ocean on her lonesomes again. So then we jump back to the dwarfs breaking rocks. And Elrond is getting tired and he takes one big swing and the hammer he's using breaks. They all start laughing. Another dwarf walks over, takes the broken hammer off him and hands him another one. And he just gives up. He literally just gives up. So he puts the hammer down and oh, excuse me. A bit of a sneeze. COVID's probably. The dwarf was like, okay, you know what your penance is. You're to leave. So he says, okay, but can the king bring me to the entrance? And he's like, sure. So then we get a shot of them in this lift going up and they're talking. You find out why the dwarf king, at least they're saying he's the king, but then you meet his father later, whatever. But Elrond is trying to find out why their friendship seems to be ruined. And little dwarf dude says to him that I haven't seen you in 20 years. You missed me wedding. You missed me children's birth. You never met the wife, these army kid, all this stuff. So he thinks he abandoned him, basically. So he kind of wrangles his way back in by telling dwarf fella, whose name I'm not sure what it is, Durin, I think it is. I think he's Durin. Yeah, he says to him, Elrond says to him that he'd like to make up for it by apologizing personally to his family. So, of course, off we go and we meet Disa for the first time, who, as we all see, doesn't have a beard, but she does have sideburns, which is probably their idea of, oh look, no, she does have a beard. It's like scraggly whiskers, but they're basically sideburns. That's where they're located. So we meet her. Derwin is saying, like as far as I know, this is Derwin, but whatever. He's saying, like, don't get comfortable. You're definitely not staying for dinner. All the rest, of course, he ends up staying for dinner. He sees the tree that he gave to Derwin, who planted it, who Disa says was called crazy for planting it because they laughed at him, told him such a thing wouldn't grow in this darkness. Now everyone says, it grows through love. So you guys, obviously, and you meet the kids for a brief second, they're running around with hats on, weird stuff like that. And then we're back with Gladriel in the ocean, and all of a sudden the raft shows up with Hellbrand on it. And you're like, how the fuck have you still got a goddamn raft? We've just seen the entire thing get destroyed. Literally. And he just gets her out of the water, and that's pretty much that scene. Then we're back to Brownie, who's home. She makes it home, and she's warning the town folk, basically, and they want none of it. They're not believing any of it. Then it jumps to Theo in the house, and he thinks his house. He thinks he's hearing rats. It's either rats or mice. I think he said mice though. In the floor, he hears scratching, so he takes a stick of some sort and just smashes through the floor, and you're like, alright, you little bastard. Calm down. But he looks into the hole, and all of a sudden you see an eye, and he freaks out. Which then jumps to Don Lemonelf crawling through hot. Now, remember what I said? He jumped down there with a torch, a flame, a torch. He now has a goddamn lantern. How? Don't know. Where did that come from? Don't know. Did he ever have one at the start of it? Nope. But he's got one now. He's crawling through these caverns, which are really small and tight. All of a sudden, you hear something ahead of him. You kind of see shadows and bits of hand. Then there's a noise from the side of him. Here, he freaks. He starts trying to get out of the hole. He's crawling. Rats are running over him. He gets into this really small area. Now, if his lantern works the way the Hobbit's lanterns work, which we'll get to because it's near the end, this would make sense. But it's the fact that he didn't have a goddamn lantern, it doesn't. But this thing is falling on its side and everything. I'm thinking, if that's a candle in that, that's a hell of a candle because it hasn't gone out. But he goes down into water. He gets out of the water. He pulls out a knife. He's against the wall. We've seen this in the trailer. He sees bubbles going through the water, so he's getting ready. And a bunch of hands come out behind him, grab him. He's gone. Takes him. Then what's her name? Bronnie runs home, walks into the house. The house is trashed. There's no sign of Theo. And, of course, there's this same type of hole that she saw in the other village. She's looking for Theo. She turns around, sees a little door over against the wall, and it opens, and there's Theo, and he's like telling her to shush and go get help or tell people. And as she's about to run out the door, she stops and decides Nah, fuck it, I'm gonna hide in the closet. And she hides in the closet. Orc comes out of the hole. He's looking around. She drops a vial of something. It's on a shelf above her, and she knocked into it, and it falls. I think she catches it, but all of a sudden the door opens. The orc, then her and Theo start fighting the orc. Do you remember in Lord of the Rings when an orc would get shot with an arrow, it would die? Well, they stab this sumbitch in the back with a knife, with a goddamn sword. They hang him, and it takes her beheading this thing to kill it. And she brings the head to the bar, slams it down, and, you know, she went all girl power. It's like, oh yeah, slay queen. Goes to the bar, slams the head down, and goes, there's your proof. That's why they wouldn't believe her, because she didn't have proof. Slams the head down, there's your proof. And they're like, alright, guess it's time to leave here. Then we're back to Galadriel and Hellband, who are in a storm. They sailed into a storm. And this part is fucking hilarious. They're in the storm, right? And they're trying to tie themselves to the raft. And he's kind of kneeling down and he's tying himself to like the edge of the raft. But she's tied herself to a big pole. And she turns around to him and says, take my hand. And he's like, what? And she's like, take my hand, you know, we can be together. Lightning hits the goddamn pole, breaks it off, and falls into the ocean and drags her off and down into the ocean. And you're like, oh, it's just well you didn't take her hand. So she's being dragged down into the ocean because she's tied to the pole, and she's still attached to the pole, being dragged down, but there's like a weight down further, pulling them down. Hellbound jumps into the water. She's unconscious, by the way. He jumps in, cuts her off, and all of a sudden, she swims out of the ocean. She's the first one that breaks the surface of the water. You're like, bitch, you were just unconscious. And now she's like, why? And she gets onto the raft and pulls him out of the water. Hey, alright. Then we jump back to the wizard, who's sitting there looking up at the night sky when Elnor and Poppy arrive. And they're trying to tell him, look, they're migrating somewhere, that all she wanted to do was help him. It seems that she can't. And he starts getting fixated on the lantern, and Poppy says, oh, it's fireflies. We use fireflies. That's why I said, like, if the Don Lemon if his lantern was being done the same way, it would be fireflies in it. And that's why it didn't go out when it was dropping. But he fixated on Poppy, gets nervous and drops her lantern, and all the fireflies come out, and he puts his hand out and starts picking. They kind of swarm around him, and he picks one out, whispers to it, and it flies up, and then he keeps doing it, and they're like, what's he saying to them? Poppy's like, makes a joke, I don't speak firefly. And I go, Jesus. Elnor kind of walks up behind him, looks up, and realizes he's making them into stars, putting them in stars, and it's obviously he's trying to make a constellation of some sort. And she's like, I've never seen that before, but I think I know where we can find it, so I can bring you to that place where you can find that. Then we go to the dwarf Derwin and his father, and his father's wearing the crown, so that's why I was confused. I was like, well, wait, I thought he was the king, but he clearly seems to be the king. They're discussing what exactly they wanted and blah blah blah, and they literally have a mystery box within a show of mystery boxes, because goddamn people from Bad Reboot are in this. And they open it up, and lo and behold, we all know what it is. It's the stuff that makes the rings. And then we go to Theo. The end of the show is Theo finding the sword hilt, which has one of the worst special effects I've ever seen. It's like a little light flashing. Blood gets sucked out of his hand, up into it, this hilt. The sword starts growing. The mother calls him, asks him, is he ready? He says, yeah, and they leave. And that's the end of the show. Boring as fuck. It's 2 episodes in, and I think there's only 8 left. Or maybe 6. I think there's only 8 episodes this season. So far, this show is terrible. But I'll leave it there for this one. So, cheers. I'll catch you in the next.